Hello, everybody, and welcome to Fusion 360 Live. I am Tyler Kikera, and here we are for another live stream. Today, what I am hoping to talk about is a little bit of the rendering environment. We've done a couple other live streams in the past that kind of talk about what's around this rendering environment, but what I was hoping to do is talk through an entire workflow, a workflow of my preference. There's a lot of different ways to get to a photorealistic rendering or a like studio lit rendering, but I wanted to show an alternate route that I don't think we've created too much content on. Um, I'm going to pull up Fusion 360 here and we'll just get started. So, a few different workflows that I wanted to discuss before we actually get into what I intend to show. So today we're going to be talking about creating a rendering for this desk here. This is like a CNC flat pack desk that I created. Kind of a cool thing. It doesn't actually have any fasteners holding it together. It's all just held together with wood pieces cut out of that flat piece of wood. Um, and this instance, it is shot or rendered inside of a basically like a photo studio, and we can kind of see this gradient background just kind of fading into the back. But there is a ground, so realistically, this is sat on a flat plane existing in some sort of lit photo studio. So this is one way to get to that end result that you're looking for. Another one would be something like this, which is what we're actually going to be creating, where it's in a photorealistic environment. And let me pull up something that Wayne did. He's actually the one moderating this. He's in the chat today. This is using an HDRI image, and some really, really photorealistic results can come from this. You can see in this case, you have like reflections on the top of this tool chest. You can see that everything in the background seems to have depth, even though this really is just a 3D image, which is incredible and does a lot of the heavy lifting for you, but it is a little bit harder to control, right? Like if there is something in the background that you don't like or you don't want to associate with this final rendering, like say, okay, all of this is great, but like this piece of furniture, I really wish it wasn't in this final rendering. Well, again, it's a kind of like a flat image, so I don't have the option to go through and manipulate something like this. Something else would be like a product shot. Like this is great for the purchase page of a website, but again, it doesn't really convey anything about this product and the environment that it intends to sit. So this is great if you want your customer to focus solely on the product. But again, if you want your customer to realize, well, where is this going to be? How is this going to act? Or where is this going to live in reality? It would be nice to put it in an environment that one you could totally design, totally control, and is exactly where you intend your product to be when the customer purchases it. So let's go through and do that. What I intend to show is what was in that screenshot earlier. We are going to create a kind of mock studio, or like a kind of like a mock living room for this desk to sit inside of, with walls and lights and pictures and also other props in the room, like you'll see a vase and some other things kind of floating around the space that like really immerse you into thinking like, okay, yeah, this feels real. I could totally imagine what this product is supposed to be used for and where it should be sitting. So I've done a lot of the kind of heavy lifting for us already. I want to focus a lot more on the rendering than I do on the actual design. So I've gone through and created a props folder for us here. And this is something that I reference for a lot of projects, right? Like I only have to build these things once, and then I can go through and just drag and drop these into my project as much as I want. If I want to use these cross projects too, well, again, I've already developed these. Like why go through and make them again? So it's a good kind of file hierarchy to have. I have this is my live stream folder in here, but inside of my more main stage folder here, I have a props folder that I'm constantly and often referencing these kind of like props designs from. So let's start building the room. Let's start building it. We'll get into the rendering environment towards the kind of the middle of this live stream, but we're also going to spend a lot of time in this design environment too. Oftentimes when I am creating these renderings, I'm bouncing back and forth between the two, moving things, breaking links between things because something isn't working or not allowing me to change appearance. It's that's kind of the benefit of something like Fusion, where again, if you were using another software where you were designing in this one software and your rendering software is something entirely different, in some instances what you'd have to be doing is jumping back into that software that you were designing in, make those changes, save it, export it, then import it back into that rendering software and continue that process as you iterate. Whereas in Fusion 360, I mean, it's literally as simple as just selecting your dropdown and then moving into a different environment, right? You're not having to worry about saving and exporting them back and forth and back and forth. So something I love about Fusion, and especially as I was working in Fusion as kind of a one-man team for my own commission work, like just having that whole suite of software all inside of one program, like I can affect the design from end to end, not actually having to jump out and move between 4 or 5 different softwares it's just so nice. I really like it, but I digress. We'll keep talking about this rendering here. So this is kind of the mock room that I've created for us. Pretty simple, right? It's just a wall, a floor, and then a kickboard or a piece of trim on the bottom to, again, create some sort of realism to it. I'm going to break this link here so it's a little bit easier for us to modify things if necessary. Let's start talking about the appearance of this, right? So these aren't the classic default materials that you see coming into Fusion when you create something or when you first extrude it. Under this modify menu, you have appearance. I'm often just pressing A on my keyboard to get to that. I'm a big fan of the hotkeys, but this is what you're going to really want to master working in that rendering environment, right? So Fusion is nice enough to provide us with some materials here, basically a whole library of pretty much anything you could want for almost any design that you're creating. And they're often adding to this too. It seems like every time I come in here, I see something new. Maybe it's just me not realizing all of the stuff that is in here because there's so much. But yeah, I feel like I'm often seeing something new inside of here. So, well, what are we creating? We're creating, again, a floor. Oftentimes this is a wooden kickboard or piece of trim, and then a piece of drywall here that's painted. So what should I do? Should I start kind of finding those things? Well, yeah, it really is as simple as that. This is so well organized, right? Like I have an option for paint. What type of paint would that be? I don't think I'm going to be powder coating my my drywall. I don't think metal flake is appropriate, and metallic seems a little goofy. So I think glossy might be good, but you know what? I don't really like the glossy appearance on walls. I know that's something that does exist, but I don't know if that's going to work for this project. Well, this comes to the point where I want to talk about next. Actually, let's download this black one here. Once you've downloaded it, you can drag it into your design panel here, and this allows you to manipulate that appearance. But again, none of these colors really work for the wall that I wanted to paint, and also I don't want it to be glossy. So what do? I didn't see another paint category in here. Well, what you can do is modify any of these appearances inside of this menu. So once again, it's in this this design panel here. I have an option for edit. And from here, I can do a lot. I can simply use these sliders and adjust the paint color. So let's do that to get like kind of salmony pink. There we go. In the thumbnail, it automatically updates and shows exactly what we want. I'm going to drag that to the wall, and that looks okay. That looks all right. Maybe I do want to get it something closer to a green color like what I had before. Now that it's actually on that material, I can see it live adjusting as I'm affecting this kind of paint wheel here. Okay, that looks good. But remember before we were talking about the issue with reflectance, and I don't want like a really glossy paint to be represented here. So what I can do is literally just turn down the reflectance. And what that's going to do is give it a little bit more of a matte appearance. And that's perfect, right? Like now I have the color, now I have the appropriate qualities I want of that material. That's really all I need. We'll talk about the advanced button and another material in a few minutes, but I think this is a good start. So now we have this wooden kickboard down here. Let's go into some options under wood. There's actually a wood painted option. Excellent. I've already downloaded one of those. I believe it's here, this 3D maple. A few things that I changed with this was basically like the texturing of the wood. It's hard to tell in this view here. Once we get into the rendering environment, there's a more accurate representation of what this material is. But in my experience, in my house, this trim is a very like clean piece of wood. You can't really see the grain running through it. So I wanted to make sure that it was represented the same way here. So you can see we have a different set of sliders for this different material. And I went through and modified this to create that exact result that I was looking for. And I think it looks pretty good. And now for the floor, I wasn't really sure what I wanted. So what I did was use another paint. But in this case, what I did was I actually turned the reflectance up. So it's kind of like more of like a marbly appearance. I didn't want to go through the effort of creating like a tiled floor. And I actually really like how this resulted towards the end of my design. And I think it looks pretty good actually. So we're going to leave that as it is for now too. So this is starting to look pretty good. I have my studio, right? This is set up. This is kind of like a mock TV set so far. From here, I'm going to go back to my data panel and start dragging some more things into it. So the thing that we are trying to capture here is this desk. So let's just drag and drop this desk into my design. Give it a second here. And you'll see once this drops in, I have this triad here where I can modify this and put it in the exact position that I want. I did a nice thing and kind of thought ahead where I created the origin plane on this desk just happens to be the exact bottom of this design. So you can see how this desk is sitting perfectly on the floor. That was very intentional in my design. And this is something I talk to new CAD users about all the time is like design around that origin. It's just going to make things so much easier when you start to assemble and you start to pattern. Just being able to reference that origin is really, really nice. But say you didn't do that and say you drop this table in here and it happens to be like in the air. Like how do you get that absolutely perfect set in this studio? The way I like to do it, and there's definitely a couple ways to do it, but under this modify menu, there's an option for align. And this is going to just kind of like, it's not going to glue this part to the floor like it would a joint. All it's going to do is just set it on the floor. And there we go. Before I do that though, you can see that I brought the entire studio up to the desk, and that was just kind of an issue with order of operations. I'd actually like to go through and ground this object. I want to ground the room. So no matter what I do, if I click and pull on this, it's just not going to go anywhere. Now it's set. So let's go back and try that again. We're going to go to modify, align, select the ground, select just the bottom foot of that table, say OK. Perfect. Now if we go to this orthographic view here, we see that it's perfectly sitting on that ground again. And from here, I could use my move tool, select the desk. First I'll have to select component, then the desk. There we go. Let's get a better view there. That looks fine. and then we'll just kind of drag this back into place. I'd like this to be pretty close to the wall ultimately. I'm actually going to turn on my origin just to see that this is pretty close to center. That looks pretty close. I don't need it to be perfect. That's the other thing with this too. You could make all of this perfect, right? Like there would be plenty of ways to make this perfectly centered over the origin. I'm going to start hanging some frames on the wall here instead of vase on the side. And again, I could have exact precision with all of these if I really wanted to. But in this case, where I'm trying to create some like imperfection in the environment, what that's going to do is create more of like a photorealism, right? Like reality isn't perfect. Someone's not going to come in here with like a perfect, I don't know, like a right angle and measure everything and make sure everything's square to this and square to that. I want a little bit of like imbalance to all of this, so it just looks a little bit more realistic. So good. Everything is placed here. Let's move on to the next thing, the next prop. So we'll go to my props list here, and let's go through and add this base. Give that a second to load in. And there we go. Same thing with this one. Looks like it's sat perfectly on the ground. Again, I kind of designed that intentionally. Oh, and before I get too far, I actually learned this from someone else in my last stream. I keep highlighting over this room component here in the background, and it just keeps flashing, and it gets kind of irritating. Like, I've already done everything I've wanted to with this room component. Like, why would I ever need to select it again? Well, there is an option. What you can do is right-click on that component, and let me make sure I'm in the right place. I am. There's an option for selectable, unselectable. So you'll see when I do that, it now has this little circle with a cross through it on the actual component, indicating that now it's not selectable. So as I hover my mouse over that background now, it doesn't flash at me. I thought that was the smartest thing. That was just something that I never considered until someone else brought that up to me. They're like, man, that's irritating. In the last live stream, like, that's just so annoying. It's just something that I didn't perceive, but perfect. There we go. That looks much better now. So now we have this beautiful vase here. Let's go through and add some bamboo into it. And I thought this was kind of a fun project. I had never created something like completely organic inside of Fusion before, honestly, inside of any CAD software. So creating a plant was kind of foreign to me. And what I ended up doing to create this was use this create form tool. I made it very, very easy. I had kind of duplicated all of these bamboo pieces, but you can even see like I have these like little lumps and knurls in them. I'm not a bamboo expert, so I don't know exactly what you refer to those as, but they feel pretty realistic. I was actually pretty proud of it. Inside of Fusion, though, we have an appearance for bamboo, but we don't have an appearance for green bamboo. And I wanted to create some contrast in the environment that I was going to put this in, and the like dried like yellow bamboo, which is this here, wasn't really giving me the effect that I wanted. So what I did is I went through and I created a custom appearance for bamboo. And I'll show you how to do that too. What I did is I selected a material that was close to it. Sometimes this can shortcut some modification. So I selected bamboo. What you can do is right-click on that appearance and edit. And of course, you have all of your basic modifiers here, which is great. But you also have an option for advanced. And under advanced, you have a lot more control. So one of those options under advanced is the image that's creating the texture on that object. So what I did is found a texture on the internet. Here's a bamboo texture, perfect. And from here, I'm pretty much done. With this, I can now drag and drop this on one of these materials, and I'm ultimately just going to Control Z back to my other material because it turned out so good. But drag and drop it onto that material. It looks pretty good as it is, but I don't see like these like knuckles, like these kind of yellowed pieces that are connecting the two. So what I'm going to do is actually go in here and try rotating this and see if that affects the design at all. And it looks like it does. So perfect. Sorry, my dog is coming to say hello. I'll introduce him to everyone here. We'll take a break from Fusion for a second. This is Sopris. We adopted him during this very exciting time. He's been wonderful, but he doesn't like he doesn't let me go through customer demos or live streams without a little bit of attention. So say hello to Sopris, everybody. All right, back to Fusion. Back to Fusion. So going through this appearance, you can see what we can do is rotate the way that that image applies to the surface. And I'm going to go through and do just that now. You can see that kind of like knuckle that I was talking about is kind of rolling into place. I don't know if I'll get this perfect because I actually haven't used this this image yet for one of these surfaces, but okay, say that's okay. What I can now go through and do is start scaling that to be proportional to the actual object that I've created. And that's starting to look pretty good, right? Like that kind of knuckle in the bamboo there lands almost perfectly on that one. The one on the bottom looks a little bit wrong, so maybe I'll jump through a little bit more of this, affect the rotation a little bit more. And let's see. It's starting to look okay. I definitely wouldn't call it as good as the last one, but ideally this is how you would do it, right? This is how you can create really quick and easy custom appearances for pretty much anything that you want. So I'm going to close out of this for now. Again, I think we've all agreed that my other bamboo appearance looks a little bit better, so we're just going to Control Z out of that. Looks pretty good. Now what we're going to do is drag and drop that, and we will insert that into my vase. So again, the idea here is just to create some more contrast. It's kind of like staging a house. It's starting to look good. Right, you can see it doesn't go all the way through the bottom, but the perspective I ultimately want to kind of shoot this rendering in is something like this. So we're not going to be looking down into the vase, so I just didn't worry about it, right? Like, don't do any extra work that you don't have to. Don't do any extra work that's not going to benefit the final result. So I think that looks okay. What I do want to make sure of is that these kind of bamboo pieces aren't making contact with the side of this vase and making it look kind of unrealistic. I don't want them like clipping through the surfaces. And that looks good. I think that's all right for us. All right, cool. So let's try inserting some of these frames. So my idea, I wanted 3 frames above this desk. So let's do that. I'm going to insert my first one here. Drag that up into place. Let's make sure that it's sitting on the wall okay. It looks like it's actually passing through the wall. And again, I could use joints or that align tool to make this absolutely perfect, but I actually like this to get a little bit of distance off of the wall because, I mean, how would this be in reality? I mean, there would be something hanging this to the wall behind it, and there would be that little space. So this might cast a little bit of a shadow, which could look pretty cool. I'm going to add a little bit of a rotation to that, maybe half of a degree. Same thing, just to create a little bit more realism to that. Okay, perfect. And I know I said I don't want this to be perfect, but I'd like to get this a little bit better centered over that desk. Actually, maybe that's pretty good. Yeah, that looks all right. So I'm going to just drag a couple more into here. There's a couple other ways to do this too. You'll see me dragging and dropping 3 separate versions of this frame in here. I was doing it before, and ultimately I want to add a decal to the inside of this frame. And I was actually trying to do a patterning tool to make it absolutely perfect on each side, where I just patterned from this center image here, or the center frame, one on each side. And I was having issues with it applying a decal, and when I applied the decal to one of these, it applied identical decals to both of them. I tried breaking links and doing it in a few different ways, but ultimately this just seemed to be the easiest for me. It's something I like to go through and research exactly what was going on there. But yeah, sometimes it's just easier to do it the way that you know works. So in this case, I know how it works. So, all right, let's move this guy like that just to be a little bit past the desk, kind of centered where the end of that desk is. Okay. Let's drag another one in here. That looks good. I'm sure someone will say that those aren't as good as they could be, but you know what? It looks all right to me. And we're going to replicate exactly what we did with these other ones over here. Let's grab this guy, do that same thing. Again, I'm just pressing M on my keyboard to move it. That's allowing me to do exactly what I want here. We want that 1/2 degree that we used on all of them. Here you can kind of see the imperfections in the height, and again, I kind of like that. So leave that how it is. So that's looking pretty good. Again, this is supposed to be a rendering live stream, and we haven't touched the rendering environment yet, but I promise we'll get there. A lot of the heavy lifting is done here, I swear. The rendering environment's the easy thing. So this is starting to look pretty good, but again, I have these cool images that I found that I'd actually like to insert inside of these frames. So let's do that. The first thing we have to do is break the link associated with these. So it makes it a little bit easier to edit. Then what we're going to do is use insert and decal. Since these are already in the project, I can just select them. I want to make sure that I'm selecting the right ones. I labeled these 1, 2, and 3. I labeled this one 2 and 3, so I'll cross that bridge when we get there. But these are supposed to go in a particular order. So this is looking good. We selected the surface. And all right, that's not to scale. So I can, again, use this kind of triad here to drag it into place. And that is definitely not the result I was looking for. So how do we fix that? How it's kind of overlapping the matting on the outside? There's this option for chain face here. And deselecting that is saying that, okay, we're only going to apply the decal to the face that you selected. This is super useful in some instances. In this instance, it's not. So let's drag this into place. That looks good. Let's kind of keep working with this process here. Let's make sure I'm selecting the right one. I think this is what we're looking for. Select that surface. Good. Like this to kind of align with the other one. All right, that looks good enough. Let's do that again. Perfect. Just managed to select all the right ones. Not sure how that happened. All right, so it looks good. A mistake I made before with this, and I don't think I just made it now, but selecting canvas instead of decal. What canvas does is kind of what's pictured there. It's more reference material for creating a design. And when you move into the rendering workspace, that canvas doesn't exist. Whereas if you're using this decal, you can get a very similar result to, again, what canvas does, but it will be represented inside of the rendering. So just keep that in mind. So this is looking pretty good so far. I think my vase moved off into space. Let's. I'm just going to break the link between all of these so I don't have that issue. And I'm also going to ground the things that I know I want to be where they are. Let's just break the link with this one too. Ground that. so I don't accidentally like click and pull on something. It's a kind of quick and dirty way to put things exactly where you want them to be. So let's move this guy back into place. Let's move these guys back into place. Yeah, this is kind of what I was talking about before, where that kind of solid is clipping through the other solid. That doesn't look very realistic. So let's make sure that we fix that. Actually, like this to be at least contacting the surface on this side. Okay, that looks pretty good. Perfect. Something else I was thinking of doing with this, this test doesn't really pop, and I was thinking about applying a different material to um, these fasteners on the edge here. So let's use some of those tools that we learned last time. I'm going to select wood, solid. Let's do painted, do maple painted and drag this up. What I want to do is drag that onto that component. Perfect. And what I actually like to do is match the orange in this image behind it. So I'm going to get close. There would be kind of more accurate ways to do this, but again, this goes back to perfections are in the imperfections. That looks pretty good. That makes that pop a little bit more. I think that's going to make it stand out a little bit inside of this room. Looks pretty cool. And we do have another prop that I wanted to insert. This is one that I just whipped up quick, a simple pen. This is not the most fun thing to set and align on here. But at the end of doing a project like this, you get pretty darn good with the move tool. Pretty comfortable with it. And this triad is used in so many other tools. So it's a good one to learn. I use it constantly. So let's rotate this down a little bit. That's fine, actually. Yeah, let's actually rotate that so that lock is sitting on there. Good. This goes back to that conversation of not wanting it to kind of like clip through that surface. So I'll play with these degrees for a second. And boom, there we go. Nice little detail on there. That looks pretty good. So our environment's pretty much done, right? This is the frame we're ultimately going to be working with. And I really like it so far. I think those photos are at a good height. I think that everything else, actually, now I'm realizing not everything is at the good in a good spot. So let's select a few of these things. Actually, as you can see how it was affecting that move triad because of that that pen that's kind of off axis. They're trying to move everything else off axis as well. And same thing with this bamboo. You can see how I selected all of these things at once. Well, now it's affecting that triad to kind of take this vase off of the ground. So I have to be kind of careful about that. What we'll do is we'll go through and use that align tool. Select the bottom of this. I'm going to turn my room back on and select the unselectable. Let's make sure that we turn that back on. Okay, that looks good. Let's make sure that my desk is in the right place. It looks like that is in the right place. Move it back a little bit. And it is grounded, so of course it doesn't want to let me do it. So let's unground it. Scoot this back a little bit. A bit more. Actually, the location of that pen still doesn't bother me. I think that's pretty good. Again, let's just double check that everything's on the floor. Nice, nice. Okay, I'm liking it so far. Now the exciting part, not pressing save, but actually moving into the rendering environment. So let's go to render. So here we are. One thing I really love about Fusion is all of these menus work from left to right. So if you have never worked in the rendering environment before, hold this one rule to heart, just move from left to right, and you'll have at least a finished rendering at the end of it. So one step, first step here would be selecting your appearances. We've already done this in the design workspace, but there might be an instance where we start going through a preview of this design and it just doesn't look right, or some of these colors don't look right. This makes it really easy to go through and kind of create some variation to that. Go through and modify and be like, okay, actually this color orange really is just too much. I can go through and select this and turn it down to something else. So really nice control that you have there. The next one is your scene settings. And this is the bulk of setting up and organizing your design. So we'll walk through most of these parameters one by one, because in almost every rendering I do, I touch almost every single one of these things. So at the very top, we have brightness. So pretty self-explanatory. At a very even level, it turns the brightness of your entire environment up or down. So if you have emissive lights, which we'll talk about in a second, it will turn everything down evenly, right? Something else you have is your position, which this affects the environment that is around your design here. So you can see as I rotate this, lights are changing. It's kind of confusing. It's like, where are those coming from? Well, what we'll do is exemplify what that environment actually looks like by changing this background. So the option for your background changes the environment that your components, or in this case, our studio, is sitting in. So if I select that, you see the entire background changes. And to change what that actual background is, you can do that from the environment menu here. And there's a bunch of pre-installed ones. This is an example of what Wayne used in that screenshot that I showed you initially with that that pull-out drawer tool chest, where he had one of these selected, and we'll select one of these more ridiculous ones just so we have better perspective of exactly what's happening. But you can see here, now I have this environment of a dry lake bed that my studio is sitting in the middle of. But the really cool thing with these is that these all have like luminance qualities and reflective properties, where you see as I switch the environment that this is inside of, that all like the color tone changed on all of these surfaces, the lighting completely changed. And I can still affect that by this rotation. Again, you can see this kind of environment rotating in the background as I change this. So this is honestly one really good way to create a photorealistic rendering, just like what Wayne did. That's just a gorgeous arrangement. It looks really, really, really good. But again, I don't have full control of it here. Now, you don't have to just go off of what is pre-installed in here. There's a lot of services that sell these. They're HDRI images, and it's really easy to attach custom ones. You can see right here, attach custom environment. If you download one of those, and there's even some free options online, you can just insert it into Fusion and boom, there you go. You have this completely custom environment around your component. So I've had some customers send me some really, really cool stuff of where they were developing an underwater product and they downloaded an underwater HDRI image and dropped their product there, and it was really immersive. And creating an underwater environment is a lot harder than creating a little living room here. So there are instances where this is definitely the way to go. In this case, it's not, but I do want to select one of these to provide a kind of a more accurate lighting. So let's select warm lighting. I think that's going to be more realistic to like a room with windows inside of it. We go back to settings, and instead of environment, I'm just going to say solid color. That will make our modification a little bit easier here. You do have options for like ground planes here, which is basically saying that your product isn't floating in space. It's going to actually be sitting on the ground, where we've already created a ground and an environment behind it. This isn't something that we really need to worry about, so I'm just going to deselect all of that. The next and probably one of the more important things is these camera controls here. There's a few in here. One, deciding how this is going to be viewed. Orthographic is saying that there's no perspective. And the perspective is, it's kind of a distortion from like the physics of a camera lens, where something on the edge of your like cropping is going to be like shortened in relation to what's going to be to the center of the lens. I'm not an expert in this, but this will give a better perspective. Like in this orthographic view that we're looking at here, if I was to measure the front of this table or the back of this table, which is obviously further away from us, those are going to be an equal distance. Like if I had a measuring tape and I put it up to my my screen right now, those would be equal distances. But if I put it into perspective here, what is in the background is now going to be shortened, and what's on the edge of my screen too is also going to be kind of wrapped around. Think of like a fisheye lens. This is exactly that. And as I change the focal length, it just gives a better perspective of that distortion. So a shorter focal length is going to be like that fisheye lens, where you can see it kind of wrapping around the frame or wrapping around what would ultimately be, again, that lens. Whereas if I go to a longer focal length here, 200 millimeters, that would be like a zoom lens. It flattens everything out. And that's naturally what happens in kind of the physics of photo taking. So generally, scenes like this are shot with a longer focal length. A lot of product photography is done that same way. So I think we're going to keep something like that. Maybe turn this down a little bit so you get a little bit of distortion. I feel like that adds, again, just a little bit of realism. Exposure is exposure to light. I'm not going to dig too deep into this, but we'll play with this in a few minutes. Depth of field is really cool too, where kind of like the portrait mode on your iPhone, I can select a point on this solid and then blur what's behind it, right? Like blur based on depth. So I'm going to turn this down a little bit here. This is basically like the amount of, this is the control of that blur, how much is actually blurred in the background. Oh, looks like we've scrolled onto our exposure there. This aspect ratio is really nice too. Like if you know ultimately what you're going to output this as, like if this is going to be a 16:9 image, it might be worth just cropping what I can see here so that I know exactly what this is going to look like when I send this out. So now actually that I have this in here, I see that like this vase seems too kind of like centered in the environment. I'd actually like to move that over to the right a little bit. And I'm going to do exactly that. So I'm going to jump back into this design environment. I'm going to select that vase and select the bamboo. And actually, I'm going to do that separately so I don't have that funny control issue. We'll put that a little more over to the side like that. Same thing with the bamboo. An option for this would be like creating a rigid group so these things move together, but again, something like this where it's like kind of scrappy and I don't really know what the end result's going to be, and I don't know if I want to move this bamboo around independently or separately or remove it totally. I just kind of like leaving it the way that it is, kind of this kind of quick, sloppy process. Like this is what's most functional for me in this case. So I like that a little bit more. You can see I'm kind of running out of space on my wall here. What I might actually do is move this table to the left. So let's go back and do that. I'm going to select my table, move this to the left a little bit. Yeah, I'm not bothered by where that pen is either. I'm going to unground these photo frames. And then let's make sure that those are relatively centered. Okay, good. Yep, that looks nice. Just go back into the rendering environment. And let this be such a good example of, again, like if you were doing this between two independent softwares, like in that second software, that second rendering software didn't give you the option to move these solids, what a pain that would be. Oh my gosh. With this, it's like jump between one workspace, back to the other, back to the other, back to the other, and there's just no latency between that because again, they're one software. So really nice and easy. So this is looking pretty good so far, right? I like this a lot. An issue that I'm seeing is like this table isn't separated out from anything, right? Like there's no highlight on this table. And that's kind of frustrating, right? Like I want this table to stand out, and I could increase the brightness of the whole room, but again, that doesn't really separate this table. It's going to highlight everything as a whole. So maybe what we do is actually create a light, like create a spotlight just shining on this object. Well, how would we do that? Let's go back to design. It said that design's a big part of the rendering environment. So let's create a new component. I'm actually just going to do that here in this workspace. So new component, let's call it light. Perfect. And again, we're going to do this kind of the quick and dirty way. I'm just going to create a sketch. Make sure everything's position is captured. Want this spotlight to look something like that. That looks good. I promise this will all reveal itself once I add a few more details here. Say that, good. So now I've basically just made a cylinder with a hole through one side of it. So that looks pretty good. Honestly, that's all I really want out of that object. So we'll leave that there. Let's put this back on the unselectable list before I get any worse comments. So let's go through and put this into position now. So imagine this is like a spotlight or like a candlelight in the ceiling. I'm going to select it and move this into position. Drag it up just so it's out of frame. I don't want this in frame. Maybe somewhere like that. Okay. That looks pretty good. And now what do we do, right? Like, okay, you have this big cylinder with a hole in it. I don't understand how that gets you any closer to highlighting your kind of hero piece here. Well, it's really easy. We've already learned how to do it. It's just applying an appearance to it. So I'm actually going to hide this room. No, let's go back and isolate this. If I pull up my appearance menu, again, just pressing A on my keyboard. Under miscellaneous, there's an option for emissive materials. And what this is basically like surfaces or appearances that create light. So these actually have like a light emitting quality when they're brought into the rendering environment. So let's pick this top one here. This looks pretty good. Give me just a second. Okay, awesome. Let's pick, where did it go? Sorry. This will be fine, actually. Okay, let's drag that up. And instead of applying it to the entire body, which would make this entire cylinder with a hole in it a light bulb, let's go through and apply this only to certain faces. So I can just drag this onto the faces that I want this on. And I just want that to the inside of this cylinder. And I think that's gonna work. I think that's pretty good. So one thing to consider with this is the luminance. So this is going to affect how bright that light bulb is. So once we get back into the rendering workspace, We'll play with that a little bit. I think it's going to be okay for now. So let's unisolate that single object. Let's go back into rendering. And in this preview here, you don't see the result of the light bulb. So don't start cranking up all the luminance values of your light bulb thinking that it's just not bright enough. What we can do is go to this in-canvas render, press play, and in this case, we should be able to see it. And it's not super bright where it's at now. You can see it kind of spilling onto the wall a little bit here, but it's not exactly what I want it to be. So I'm going to stop this in-canvas render, pull up my appearance menu, select that bulb. Let's crank it up a little bit, maybe even too much. We'll see how it looks. Press play. Holy cow, is that different? That is quite a lot closer to what I actually was hoping for. Now, I see that it's also kind of splashing onto that wall. Is that what I want? No, honestly, it really isn't. And one reason why that could be is because I applied the appearance of that light bulb to this entire cylinder pointing down. So you could imagine that this light can reflect, well, not even reflect, I mean, it's just a direct pattern from that light onto the wall. So maybe I remove the remove the that surface material there. I'm just going to put something else on it. Let's put something that's not going to reflect very much. We'll just select one of these base materials. Let's make sure that, I'll give us a second here. Just jump back into the design environment really quick. It's a little bit easier to control some of this. It looks like that light appearance is still at the top. That looks good. Let's go back into rendering. I lied. Let's go back into design and unisolate that. Let's do that in-canvas render again. Much better control. Now you see that light isn't spilling immediately out onto that wall. Now it's kind of directing down onto that table. And that looks pretty good. But, I mean, it's not perfect. Now it's creating a lot of dark shadows underneath it. So what I'd actually like to do is go into the scene setting and actually turn my exposure up a little bit, right? And this will affect this a little bit differently now. Maybe we'll jump down one here. Let's see. No. Let's try that again. Yeah, that looks good. And this is a lot of what my rendering process looks like. It's just like really just a constant like back and forth of like, try this, that didn't work, okay, let's remove this, let's try this, let's keep moving. And it's just this super iterative process, right? It's no different than design or anything else that you're doing in relation to creating, right? You're just like constantly making better and seeing the mistakes that you made and fixing them and yeah, copying and pasting things that did work. So this is starting to look pretty good. I think that bulb is just still too bright, so let's turn it down a little bit more. More wanted it to be a highlight instead of like the total focus of this design. Let's change how this is framed a little bit. I want to kind of cut off a piece of this vase here so it doesn't look like it's the total focus of this this design. And yeah, this in-canvas rendering is giving me some really good perspective of how this is going to look. I still think it's a little bit dark. So let's brighten it up a little bit. I think that's okay. Let's try this one more time. And that looks pretty darn good. I like that. That's nice. So we're accepting of this rendering now. We think that this is going to output something close to what we want it to be. What do? Let's now move over into that rendering option. So there's a lot of control in this too. It is honestly super simple, but it gives you a lot of control. So these selections at the top here are basically just deciding your resolution. So there's a lot of presets in here that you can select. Like if you're designing this rendering for mobile, here's a bunch of often used perspectives, should say aspect ratios for mobile, print, and then custom. So we use the 16:9 aspect ratio. Maybe that'll be nice for us to use. So that might look all right. Exposure, we want it to be exactly what we have already set in those scene settings. The next option is render width. And this is something that I absolutely love. I remember initially using Fusion as a total customer, not working for Autodesk. My gut reaction to any cloud services was like, oh, it's just like nickel and diming me, blah, blah, blah. This is so nice. This in the rendering environment is incredible. Processing these rendered images is so computationally heavy for your computer. Like for a single image on a really nice piece of hardware, like a really, really nice computer, can take like 20 or 30 minutes. And if you have one object that you're trying to get like 3 different perspectives of or 3 different views of, each one of those takes 30 minutes. You're going to lock up your computer for an hour and a half. Like, no, that's crazy. Farm it out to the cloud. Like, just send it to cloud computing. This is saying it's going to take 1 cloud credit to render the final version of this image. So for $3, I could do 3 renderings of this image, keep working on my computer, and then Fusion will just tell me when these are done and ready. Like, is an hour and a half of my time worth $3? I think so. I think in this case, it would undoubtedly be more valuable to run this on the cloud than to tie up my local hardware and do it myself. So there is cases where it's just an absolute no-brainer to just send it out to the cloud. There's also tons of instances where I'm just locally rendering, where like it's just easier for me to like pop out a couple of these. Like I'm going to get up and walk away from my computer anyway. I'll just do it locally instead. In some cases, like the really, really simple designs, like that one with the white background that I showed originally, that little clamp, that was quicker to do locally in a standard quality. It took maybe 4 or 5 minutes to do that locally, whereas if I sent it to the cloud, it probably would have taken like 6, 7, maybe 10 minutes. Maybe not that long, but it would have been fractionally more. So in this case, I'm just going to send this out to the cloud. So cloud, I'm going to say a final rendering. This isn't usually my process. Generally what I'll do is like a couple standard qualities. I'll like twist and distort the perspective of the rendering that I'm trying to send out, and then I'll do a couple more. But let's give a good example of this. Like I've just slightly changed the perspective of my rendering. And again, this isn't a very cost-effective way to do this. In my normal workflow, I would be doing standard qualities, but we got nothing to lose here. Hopefully one of these will just turn out right for us. We're in more of a time crunch than a concern for cost right now. So maybe I'll zoom out a little bit and shift this more to the center of the frame. Okay, let's say render. So now those are all processing. An amazing thing with this too, like even though it's processing on the cloud, as this starts to develop, I'll still be able to go through and see it actually processing. Like I'll be able to see it going through its rendering process. So again, it just gives me an idea of exactly what is happening. It's not a total mystery until it's done. So like this one here is saying 7 minutes remaining, 7 minutes remaining, 14, oh, now 7 minutes remaining. So like, even if it was the exact amount of time on my local hardware to process that, like this would have been 21 minutes of rendering. Well, now I've just cut it down to ultimately 7 minutes because we've just referenced 3 different cloud computers, and it's just processing all of them at the same time. And I can still now work in the background and not have my local hardware be taxed by these renderings. So super, super cool. I really, really like it. Some other little tidbit I wanted to show you inside of this rendering environment is something with the video. I'm actually going to open up another project while that is running in the background here. Let's do here and open up the CNC desk. So I'm going to pull this straight into the rendering environment. Good, we already have a little bit of a scene created here. I'm actually going to just turn the background to a solid color, make that white. Okay. So under this rendering tab, I didn't talk about it before, but there's an option for video. And I'm going to select a really low quality just so that we can process this in time here. But I'm going to go through and press render. We'll give this a second to process. And you'll see in this case, this is one that is quicker to just do locally than send to the cloud. So perfect. Looks pretty bad, but gives a point. There's this option once you've rendered that video to render as a turntable. And this is so cool. This is kind of like on the Nike website when you customize a shoe and you can click and drag on the shoe and rotate around it to see all the different perspectives. You can do that with any one of your designs inside of Fusion. So with this same thing, I have the options to decide aspect ratios. The frames are deciding like how many pictures basically it's taking around the rotation. For simplicity, I'm just going to leave it at 6 for now and standard, but let's render it. Saying it should take less than 20 minutes, so fingers crossed that that's the truth. So once this is done processing, what it's going to do is give me an option of how I want to output this, this turntable. And I can output it as a video, or I can output it as an HTML. So this is the video. And again, I only did 6 frames of this, so it's pretty clunky. But now I can click and drag on the screen and rotate around my object. And imagine if this was a final rendering, like how amazing would this be for a customer to be able to interact with the product in this way? Like they can now see every perspective of this object that I've designed for them. And then even more so, like immerse themselves in this product. So imagine on the purchase page for this desk, like I have an image of the desk, I have this interactive turntable, and I also have the rendering of that desk inside of an environment where it should ultimately exist. Like that's a slam dunk, right? That's a home run. And all of that is done inside of Fusion, right? Like we didn't have to go out, select, or go out and use any other software. So again, from here, you have the option to output this as an HTML viewer, to embed this in a website as a video, or just zip it. So pretty cool. Now, I have no idea how these renderings are going to turn out. It looks like some of them are still processing here. So we might just fall back onto the rendering that I created before, kind of like the turkey under the counter on a cooking show. But we'll give this another second to load in here. Oh, it looks like one of them might have finished. And it looks okay, right? Like, I'm not totally sold on that. I'm getting some funny reflections actually on the glass in the frame here. Actually, I really don't like the shadowing underneath this table. So this would be a case where I would go through and iterate. Like, honestly, in this live stream, I didn't know how this was going to turn out. But yeah, I'm not totally sold on it. So I would, in this case, totally go back and iterate. Where I would ultimately like to make it to was this design, where it's like this very minimalist environment, super clean. A customer could imagine this like being on, or being in their studio next to the wall, or being in their living room where their kids are going to work. Like, I wanted this product to be able to like blend in with like the natural textures of the room that it's going to be inside of. I didn't want it to be shouty. I didn't want it to be loud. And this conveys that for me. And it's photorealistic. And this tells something to the customer that wouldn't exist inside of a rendering with just a white background. So this was really, really nice for me. This is something that I would love to put on this item's like product page, its purchase page. So yeah, this is something I don't think I could have done with an HDRI image. This isn't something that I could have conveyed with just a white background. So this is a workflow that was, I think, perfect for this application, for this specific job. So hopefully that taught you guys something new. Like hopefully that opened your eyes to like an alternate way of workflow or rendering or just designing and thinking of how you're actually going to create the visual for this product that you're designing. There's seemingly like 40 different ways to get to the exact same point in any CAD software, and this is no exception. But again, hopefully this was a good brainstorming session for everybody. So thank you. I'm excited to see what's in the comments. I'm excited to see what kind of questions you guys have, or excited to see what you guys can teach me new, like you did in the last live stream. But I do want to thank everyone for having me and sitting in here with me for an hour, saying hi to Sopris. And yeah, I'm excited for the next one. Everyone stay safe, and I'll see you soon.